So we're back. Myself, Pastor Jeff, Cleveland area, ELCA, Pastor Andrew, Rochester, New York, ELCA Lutheran as well. If you found this by accident, which you didn't. We have a topic that I think is one that's not just applicable to pastors, but is one that is also very pertinent for everybody. Okay, so we all have people. This is not surprising at all. We all have people in our lives, whether they're close friends, fellow church members, co-workers, neighbors, whomever. So we disagree with their approach to Christianity. We just have different viewpoints. And this can happen, obviously, outside of, for a Lutheran, looking outside at other different expressions of Christianity. But it can also happen within our own expression of Christianity, within the ELCA, within our own congregations. And so what we were going to touch on today is just kind of tackle our approach to how have we dealt with individuals that we don't agree with, that we say, yeah, that's not how I see God. That's not been my experience of Jesus or what I see in the Gospels. And how do we do that in a faithful way that is compassionate, but yet still maintains a sense of conviction? So I'm going to turn to the man with all of the answers. Pastor Andrew, let me give you an easy question first. In your 15 years of ministry, have you experienced people that you look at them and say, really? That's what you believe about God? Or that's what you believe about church? Has that ever happened to you?
Short answer, yes.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate, if you will?
A little bit longer answer. Yes, that has happened. But I think, like you said, and I think everyone can agree, we can agree that there are people that we disagree with. An example that came to mind that when we were talking about it before is in my first church. We had the leader, president of the local Republican chapter, and we had the leader, president of the local Democrat chapter. These two men, who, when I came there, were in their early 70s and had been in these positions for, I think, decades, they constantly were at each other. They were constantly arguing. They never, brought out the colorful metaphors or anything like that. But
they're both members of the congregation.
Yeah, they were both members of the congregation. Yeah. And of course, if you talk to them, they're like, "Yeah, we're like best friends." But they would argue and they would tell each other how wrong they were. And, you're dumb. I can't believe you said that. But the thing is, and they would do that all the time, and they do it in the parking lot. But once they hit those doors of the church, literally, red doors, good Lutherans, once they hit those doors, it stopped.
Huh.
It's like they took all their differences and they set them outside the doors, and they came in, and you would never know. If you saw them inside that church, you would never know. All you would know is they were really good friends.
Huh.
And so one time I asked him, I said, gosh, it must be, and I said, you guys have an interesting relationship. And they both looked at me and they said, the thing is this, and obviously I've never forgotten this. They said, the thing is this, outside these doors, we can bicker about things and we can disagree about things. But the one thing is, God is above all of this. And God calls us to love our neighbors. And the one guy says, and the thing is, if you've never seen the guy's face who used to do Smucker's commercials, you would think this guy was that voice. He just had this calm voice, except when he was upset. He says, God calls us to love each other, and God is above, all these differences that we find here. And he says, and I love this guy. And the other one's like, yeah, and I love this guy too. So that's always been something for me. We can have these differences and we can disagree on things, but it's almost the question that I constantly ask, but where is God in this relationship? Where is Christ in this relationship? And how does that steer us? Because the thing is, they would argue out, and even outside church, but that never left their relationship. There was always that sense of love and respect. Now, I mean, sometimes, I watched them bicker and you'd be like, there's no love in that relationship.
Yeah.
But there was. And that's, personally, that's how I try to live. You know, there are people that will say things or do things, political, otherwise, and I'll shake my head, but that's one of the first questions that pops into my head as I'm thinking these things. How is God calling me to love this person? And then what does that love look like? And I think that's what all of us need to strive to do, because that's what we're called to. Well, that all sounds very pastoral, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I don't even know if that answered the question.
I don't even remember what the question was, so it probably did, or it might not have. But what you're saying in a way is like you're holding it up as your ideal, because that's perfect. You have these two people that are opposed to one another, and yet they're even in their opposition, their foundation is love and respect. So it almost gives them a sense of freedom to disagree, because we know, like they know, it'll never get to the point where we're always mindful. So it'll never get to the point where we're truly putting our relationship in jeopardy. So that's beautiful. How do you deal with individuals that, or are there times, because I will say there have been times in my life where you interact with somebody that you say it can't be, whether it's because there isn't that foundation of respect and love or something else, but the relationship is toxic in the sense that one person is abiding by potentially like, all right, well, I'm trying to find some common ground. But where you look at that person, let's say it's even a member of the congregation, we don't agree. We can't have a constructive conversation around that topic. And so for our friendship, we don't touch that. We go around it. But are there ever relationships that it goes beyond just like this category where it seems like a basic just personality thing? This person and I do not mix for whatever reason. How do we go about handling those relationships? In both of us recognizing it, but we can't be in a relationship. Like we can't be in a friendship. We can't work together. You know, it's probably better if we don't talk because for some reason stuff triggers things and we can't hear each other. All right, so let's say I'm going to give you a specific topic, and I'll give one that's kind of outdated. But the church's practice had been in generation past that individuals did not get communion until they were confirmed. That was that was like your entrance point into it. And the church has since moved on from that there was some debate about that. So let's say if that was the topic, if the topic was a theological topic, and the church has said, it's become more common practice to say, we don't think this was right because of what it symbolizes. We need to adjust. And somebody vehemently disagrees with you on that topic. How do you discuss those types of issues with somebody? And do you get to a point ever where you just say, sorry, we don't agree? And from a pastoral point too, you might want to pepper in the idea of, as the pastor, to lovingly say, I really appreciate where you're coming from, but on this particular issue, you know, if it's something that's under my office of ordination, word and sacrament, this is just going to be the way this is carried out. So how do you deal with those kinds of issues?
There are a lot of questions in there.
I don't remember. I blacked out for about half of it. So.
Well, you just gave this example of communion. So,
yeah,
you know, I see that, like the age of communion, I see that as an evolution, because we look at church history, that's just always been in flux on when that happens and everything. So I just see that as one of those things that's a constant evolution, de-evolution, however you want to say that. Evolution.
A reformation constantly.
Oh.
Always being reformed.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening in the church. And there's that growth but then there's that understanding, and it's just always in flux. I think we're called as Christians, just in general, in our secular world, as we claim, kind of connecting back to what I said before with those two guys, we're called to ask those questions and, to say, okay, well, what does it look like to love this person based on the faith and our belief of an understanding of Christianity, and what makes us Christian, what makes us then further specified ELCA, Lutheran, what have you. But we need to ask that question. Maybe it's finding common ground. The thing that came up for me, which you kind of touched on, is what if you don't agree? And it's like that question from all your job interviews. Well, how do you work with someone that you don't agree with? Or
Right.
What kind of people can't you work with?
Right.
And, for the longest time, I'd be like, I could work with everybody.
Right.
That was true until I became a pastor.
Huh.
Because there have been some people in congregations I've served, some of my peers, that I'm just like, I don't know how to work together. I don't know how to find that common ground. So for me, it's been, I respect that person and the ministry they're providing. It's just, I don't see how that fits in with my understanding of ministry, my understanding of what we're called to, if it were a congregation member, if there's this toxic relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's where the office of pastor comes in, because if it becomes a toxic relationship, or is a toxic relationship with that person and myself, there's some wiggle room. But when that toxic relationship starts to become toxic to the ministry of the congregation,
Okay.
I see that the office of pastor to be like, we need to have a conversation. Because honestly, I would say this would get me in trouble, but I don't, I'll have a conversation about it if someone wants to. In my previous two churches, I have invited a few people to perhaps find a congregation that better fits their beliefs.
Right.
So, of course, that's a pastoral way of saying, I think you need to go to another church.
Yeah.
No,
one of us can't stay here. It's got to be me or you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not I think. It would be best for everyone.
Yeah, right, for the congregation. It's not even a personal thing. It's truly, things will go smoother here if one of us is not here. And you have to come, to that kind of conclusion.
And that's, and that's really difficult, not only as a person and pastor to say, but then what I'm thinking of one or two people in particular. I mean, I didn't do this to a bunch of people. I didn't say this to a bunch.
Like 50 people. That's it.
No. Like it was three people total from these two churches. One of them, it became a bit of a power struggle, because even though they left and said to me, which the other ones did too, they're like, I think that's a good idea. That became a power struggle, because then they tried to get involved in different ways, and there were some difficult conversations, and then I also went to other people, said, I need you to have my back on this. Anyway, I think that got off a tangent, but I think we just need to all strive first to ask those questions. How is God calling me to love this person? How's Christ calling me to love this person? In a sense, where is Christ in this relationship or not in this relationship? And then, is there common ground? And if there isn't, I mean, I'm not saying like kick those people out of your life completely. It's just, I think it's just a recognition of like, maybe it's just not best that we connect on maybe that personal level rather than professional level. Right. I'm just thinking of like with other pastors.
Right. Like it's probably best if I unfollow your posts.
Yeah, like
Facebook. It's not going to go well. Yeah, we should not be engaged. Part of the reason I had brought up the example was in my first congregation where I served not that long ago, relatively speaking, that had been their practice, was you did not receive communion until you were confirmed. And that was being practiced when I got there in 2006, which was at least 20 years after a shift had been made in the church to moving away from that. And it was even a part of their their constitution about like who are the communing members of the congregation. So like if you were an adult and you were confirmed, you only had to show up, to be a voting person, you had to show up once a year and make a contribution of record. But to commune in the first place, you had to go through 2 years of instruction. But once you had the 2 years of instruction, you could do whatever you want. The insanity of that. And now I even had at the time the backing of the bishop when I interviewed and one of the assistants to say, hey, this is one of the things you're going to encounter when you get down there. You need to lower the age of that.
Oh, interesting.
I was like, oh, great. And so I waited about a year into my ministry there before I kind of brought it up to council and said, this is what I'm thinking. And they were like, well, yeah, I guess. And I said, well, I'll try to go about it in this manner. I'll offer some instruction, some classes on it. I'll write some newsletter articles. I'll prep people for this is what the plan is. And so I offered classes and on the sacrament of communion, and I had a decent 12 to 20 people, somewhere in that range, show up for the class. Had very constructive classes. Now, did any of the people who were vehemently against lowering the age come to the classes? No. So the opportunity for constructive conversations didn't happen with them for the most part. And after the class, everybody in the class was, oh yeah, we should definitely raise or lower the age for it. And I said, okay, well, we're not going to do this immediately. And I mentioned the bishop had been, had asked me to do this. And so this was like around March. And I said, we'll do it March, April. I said, we'll do it in Reformation Sunday. So we'll change it. We'll give it 6 months. But like the 6-month thing, we're not going to start right away. I remember the council meeting. This is actually memorialized in a book that I made it into on horrible things that pastors have had to live through. I actually submitted a story, and they were like, yep, we'll take this one. The individual who came to a council meeting was very upset and demanded that the council override my decision to lower the age, pointing to the Constitution. So this is the Constitution. If the council did not back what they were saying, this individual would then go to the congregation and raise this issue and have everyone removed from council for like breaking their responsibilities. And so I'll never forget, this is a situation some of the details will change over time with my memory, but I'll never forget this happening. Like your example, but in a negative way. The guy left the room and the council was silent during this guy's 10-minute rant where he's yelling and pounding fists on tables. And the gentleman leaves, and he's deceased now, so may God rest his soul. The gentleman leaves, and council kind of takes a breath. And I remember the one woman on council looking at me going, well, Pastor, what should we do? Yeah. And I was like, at the time, I was like 28, and I'm like, look at all these people that should know better and, have more life experience. And I said, well, unless you guys want to get kicked off council, I guess you're going to reverse my decision, And they did unanimously reversed my decision because there wasn't a level of respect for the larger church. They know, they didn't care that the bishop said do this. They didn't feel like that I was in a position to say, you have to do this. We need to do this. But then, so I guess, so I'm bringing it up, and the reason I even went into it a little bit, there's more details to it, but the reason I even went into it is because that's an issue where my core beliefs as this is what I believe it means to be a Christian, and this is what it means for communion. This is what communion means. I have these convictions. Now, the constitution that the congregation has, or other people in the congregation might say, that's wrong. We don't agree with it. But then the way I approached it, which I would do differently if I went back in time, was to say, okay, well, these are my convictions, and I guess we'll agree to disagree, and we just won't have it. We won't make the change. And I allowed that kind of relationship to then change the balance. Not that there was a good balance, but change the balance to where I was only at that congregation for another 2 months. I was in the call process. But it would have been a situation where for the rest of that time, no matter how much longer I stayed there, my relationship with that individual who came in the room and went on that rant would forever be changed. So he deep down, God bless him, and I seriously mean this, he felt he was right. He felt like he was upholding what the church taught, and he was doing right by Jesus. And he felt that I was just destroying Jesus by doing what I was doing. So when two people both root their position in, this is my experience of Jesus and the church, and this is what it's supposed to be like, and my experience or your experience is completely on the opposite side of that, is that a situation where then if it's two members or if it's somebody on social media that you can kind of choose, there's some ways to kind of go around and just say, all right, we want to serve on a committee together, or how can we have meaningful dialogue about this and find a good resolution. But let's just say that person just constantly, if you've ever been in a congregation, I'm sure if anybody's actually watching this, they'll have been in this. If you've been in a congregation where you know your relationship with someone has completely changed, and it's just, and not even to cast blame, and I realize this is really long, but not even to cast blame, but just to say, this is not good anymore. There's hurt feelings on both sides, and some stuff that was said can't be taken back.
Yeah.
So I was saying all that to get to this, because I've heard this used as a defense. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Jesus says, forgive 70 times, 7 times. Jesus says, settle your debt or your lawsuit or whatever with your neighbor before going to the temple, get all that stuff. So how would we recommend to people when we're saying, we are called to love people? I'm called to look at that person and say, God loves that person more than I'll ever know.
True.
I don't like that person.
Yeah.
I don't like what they've done. I don't like their decision, their actions, not the person as an entirety. But how do I engage with that person, turning the other cheek, forgiving, while also not making myself a doormat for abuse? And if you're able to answer that, you need to just get a national a book going out and published and all that. So I know it's a hard question, and I apologize for even asking it, but it's something that I've struggled with. How do I preach turn the other cheek and love somebody when there's some people when I feel like every time I extend my love to them, they just go whack. Where's your other cheek? Whack.
Yes, we aren't called to be a punching bag.
Bless you.
And we, any of us. And there are going to be people that aren't going to like, as pastors, as people in general, aren't going to like the decisions that we make or won't agree with us. As a pastor in a pastoral office, that situation is not something one of millions that seminary doesn't prepare you for. That's a life experience, but obviously that was a power struggle. And I have all these pastoral counseling things that come to mind for me that I want to say to you, but
no, that I welcome anything.
Well, so obviously that was a power play on this man's part,
but a power play that he believed was rooted in Jesus.
Yeah, so personally, then I would see, and if I understand you correctly, he didn't show up to any of these meetings.
No, none of the classes, no.
So there was that opportunity, and then there's a lot of stuff in that individual circumstance. But I think the question is, people aren't going to agree with you all the time. And that's one of the struggles. I wouldn't say, that's one of the struggles of being a pastor, but it also, that's a struggle of life. People aren't going to agree. And how you take that, personally, professionally, what have you, is difficult. Those people that I talked about that I invited to go to another church, when they left, it felt like it just like someone cut a chunk of flesh from me.
You didn't take joy in doing it.
When they left, and I was the one that said that to them. And whenever someone leaves a congregation and goes somewhere else, it hurts. I think it hurts.
Yeah.
Well, at least for me personally, it hurts. But then it hurts church, small c, that congregation, and because there's relationships that were formed there. And of course you can see people outside the building and whatnot.
So, you started initially,
the thing is,
punching bag thing,
Yeah, we're not called to be a punching bag. Jesus, we turn the other cheek, but that doesn't mean we just take it all the time as people. People in general. People probably disagree with me with this. It hits on so many things, especially going on in the world right now. Yeah. We're called and asked to do things right now in this pandemic world that isn't for us, it is for our neighbors. It's for the good of our neighbors, but not only the good, the life saving for our neighbors. And we're arguing about that. We're making it political, which is just, it boggles my mind that that's even happening, because it just comes down to such simple things. You know, would you do this to someone else? You know, would that whole thing with social media, people, that idea where it's just like, I'm going to type this and put it out there, and it's that safety of I can do this and there's nothing that person can do back to me. But would you say that to their face? And the sad thing for me is it's moved from, at least it was something I agreed, it's moved from an answer of, oh, I wouldn't say that to them, to now, well, yeah, I would totally do that. And they mean it. You know, I think of this code of conduct that my kids have to sign for their at school, you know, and like cyberbullying and all these somewhat new terms. I mean, that's what that is. It's cyber. It's just bullying. And you know, don't do this. But the answer anymore, not only from younger generations, but really in general, is like, yeah, well, I would totally do that. How is that? Not only is it, how is that
not
loving?
Only would I do it, but I don't even care if you videotape me while I'm doing it to show the world I'll still behave like this, you know, and I think I'm right.
If I understand it correctly, I think it's interesting your bishop's like, yeah, when you go there, you need to do this. That sounded interesting to me. But I think I'd be interested to look at that congregation's constitution. They felt some reason to put this age limit in there, which if it's in the Constitution, it's got to go before everyone anyway, and then be approved by the synod and what have you. But I would also look in some of the other chapters, because I'm pretty sure it says in there that direction on that kind of thing is in the office of pastor. Like it's under your authority.
I mean, the ministering the sacraments is technically under my office. However, and which I'll come back to in a second, but that's, you know, I had the discussion it was reflecting on it. It's ironic because the guy did not come to any of the classes I offered. However, when I first got there, I offered some Christian ed classes. And like I've done in every church I've been at, when I get somewhere and if I offer like a first series of classes, since I'm first there, it's the honeymoon, I have more people in attendance than I'll ever get ever again in my life. And we were going over, which I think you referenced in a video that I don't know if we posted or not, but will be in the special edition outtakes and bloopers reel of the Lutheran Handbook. And so we were going over it was a Lutheran Handbook course. It was like I don't think it was called Lutheran Handbook course. It was the
Here I Stand
course. Yeah. And so we're going over that. And in that course, if you've never taken it, it's not just the pastor gets up there and says certain things. It was back in the days of VHS, I think, or it might have been a DVD. It was a DVD that you go and you're watching Lutheran scholars state this is what Lutherans believe in general terms. And then you'd have a discussion about it. And so part of it was a discussion on this is communion, and it came up, and this individual who later came in and made the scene and made certain through kind of drew the line in the sand, said we were talking about communion, and he at that time, 2 months into my ministry there, said, no, you don't get communion until you're confirmed. And I said, well, you know, what about, I just try to look for a loophole. I said, what if somebody moves to this congregation and their child has received communion at a younger age and they're not confirmed yet? He goes, you stop giving them communion. And I remember saying to him, I don't think I would do that. I knew where he stood. What's comical, what I'm circling back to, is that I had the classes. There were murmurings that people were upset. There was another person who was on council called me and said, you need to pull this communion thing. Because people have stopped contributing financially to the congregation because they're upset about it. And so people are this and that. And I said, well, that's just ridiculous. They're not contributing to me. They're contributing to the congregation and to the ministries we do. But, through that conversation, I knew there were rumblings. And so I called the bishop back, and we can talk about this after the recording. But I called the bishop back and I said, this is what's going on. And the bishop said, you are the officer. You are the pastor. You are in charge of the office of word and sacrament. You do not need their approval. You change the age of communion. And I said, okay. Now, I didn't bring up to the bishop about the Constitution issue, honestly, because I had not read the Constitution, and it wasn't until that evening at council that I even knew it was in there. When the guy came in, I was like, what? Wait, it's in the Constitution? But
right, because it shouldn't be in there.
Because it shouldn't be. Right, it blew my mind. And I didn't call the bishop back up and say, look, I need you to come down here and help me sort this out. So I didn't take those steps, but the bishop was, this is what you do. So in going around all of that I think I've seen people, my experiences, I've seen the meek and the people who extend more compassion than other people come out on the negative side of these relationships because they're continually saying, but God wants me to love them and accept them and to not fight with them or argue with them. And therefore their interpretation of that means I have to allow this person to continue treating me like this. And if anything, they get to the point where if to avoid that, they stop coming. The person who was causing the trouble, they didn't go anywhere. The person who was hurt and affected by it is left. And so there's all these like family systems theory and pastoral stuff that, we're going over right now. But I'm just it's hard for me to view things. I have to remind myself sometimes it's hard for me to view things outside of the pastoral lens because I'm just so used to it now. But I'm trying to think as a lay person, as a member of the congregation, coming to church, wanting to love God, wanting to love Jesus to the best of my ability, not being confrontational in nature, and then experiencing something where you just say, this is no good, that I would probably just walk away. And then that's sad because I wouldn't, as the pastor, I would say, no, you need to stay. We need more people like you. But how do we, give that advice to people to say, how do I look at everybody in the congregation and maybe even the people that you're talking about, people that you said you might be happier somewhere else, to say, I love you as a Christian. I love you as your pastor. But I think it's obvious we don't agree on a lot of issues. And maybe I'm answering the question as I'm putting it out there, and so you can just let me know. I love you, for anybody. I love you as a Christian. I love you because we're called to love everybody. It's obvious that we don't agree on a lot of things. And either we come to a common understanding of we don't agree on these things, and we're going to keep moving along in the same place, just not agreeing on them, but not creating a negative environment for the congregation. Or if we can't do that, then we have to find some kind of resolution where one of us goes. Would that be, would that be your approach to it, or no?
First I want to say, especially that being your first congregation, as you said, 28, and now speaking as a 40-something.
48-year-old. I'm kidding. No. 41-year-old. But yeah, go ahead.
42. With age comes, I want to say, some wisdom, but also stupidity.
Yeah.
There was a lot there. Your situation is just such a definition of a power play by a congregation member, by a person.
Yes.
People aren't going to agree with you. Now, as a pastor, my approach to that would have been, My practice is to read the Constitution.
It would not have helped in that situation, but yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, all three churches I've served, one of the first things I did is I read the Constitution.
Yeah.
And when I told counsel or people that, they're like, "You read the Constitution?"
Yeah. And I think
like,
I probably did initially,
yeah.
but I forgot most of it. Yeah.
No. And you know, yeah. But yeah, that's a power play, and that can happen. When things start happening, like people are withholding money because of things, or I mean, that's a serious conversation now that you need to have not only with this guy, but with the congregation. And it's like,
Yeah.
who are we if this is what's happening?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just but again, that's something that we aren't trained to encounter,
Yeah.
What else did you say? You talked about you talked about loving people, but then also, I mean, that would be a hard conversation because you have people that are so resistant and believe, again, believe they have this power and this influence. And, if they've been there, well, it's
60, 70 years at that time.
Yeah, 60, 70 years, or even if they've been there, let's say a year, but they're the loud voice.
Yeah.
People are like, there's that idea of, well, just let that guy talk and eventually he'll just peter out or whatever. And, but then it's also, well, yeah, I guess we need to do whatever because, whatever he says, whatever motivation that brings to them, it's controlling. And and for me, that's when you go to this person and you're like, all right, I've tried to find common ground. I've tried listening. I feel and I think I've done all these things, but you get down to it, and that's when you bring things out like your own brood of vipers, and you have to have a real tough discussion with these people and be like, this will not happen anymore.
Yeah.
And you're gonna and that relationship, honestly, I mean, it'll appear broken, but I mean, that kind of stuff I mean, that in particular, I mean, with communion, it's like exactly what your bishop said. You are in the office. This congregation has called you to be in that position. So that is a chance for education. And it's also part of what I would call, our pastoral authority. That is in the Constitution.
Right.
That's in there. That's in there. This thing that the congregation added whenever of well, you have to be confirmed before you get communion, which again, like I said in the beginning, has been an evolution.
Right.
It's like this contradicts exactly what is in, because I imagine that 9th grade communion thing didn't have an asterisk next to it. No. However, I believe within chapter 9 of every constitution in every ELCA church and synod and the national constitution, duties and of the office of pastor, right in there it says, in layman's terms, it's up to you. You have been given this authority by the church, capital C, but also by this congregation. And
as long as and just put it in there because you know it, I know it, but as long as you're doing everything within the under the umbrella of what is acceptable in the ELCA, then the authority. If we came in and said, well, I'm just going to start, I'm going to sacrifice a pig on the altar, we're going to use that blood, or something like that, would be like, whoa, we're not, but authority under the confessions, under the creeds, the traditions of the church. And so I think even though all of that was very pastoral, and I appreciate your response because that helps me. And obviously, I would like to think that if I were in that exact same situation today with 14 years of experience and age, that I'd handle it differently than I did 1 year out. But I think what you said is also very relatable for people in general, that we have relationships in our lives and we know which ones they are. It's harder with family than with friends at times because family, there's that extra, the line in the sand's drawn a little bit further out maybe. But there are those relationships that, if we're being honest, some of them we allow ourselves to be taken advantage of, or that are not the healthiest. And I think exactly what you said is a very healthy way to approach it. If you recognize it, to see it, to say, hey, this has been going on. This is how it's making me feel. And I want this relationship. Like I want to be able to continue to talk to you. I want to be able to do this and that with you. But I'm gonna be honest with you, if it keeps going this way, and maybe you don't realize it's having this effect on me, which is a great conversation piece. But if you are, or if you are now that I'm telling you, if these things continue, then I'm not going to continue to put myself in this, in the situation anymore. And that is still a loving response, because God is also calling us to care for ourselves and to model good relationships for other people. And if somebody sees, I had not thought of it till this moment, but if other people on council, if other people in the church continually see a pastor, or let's say anybody else, a member of the congregation, with another member of the congregation, and see somebody continually, consistently dump on that other person and nothing happens, then that affects the structure and the environment, the atmosphere of that congregation. And people begin to see, well, okay, I guess so-and-so can just do whatever they want to do, So it's part of our call as well to confront those situations in a caring way, but to still proclaim the truth, and to still hold on to that conviction without, you're not called, you lose yourself for the cross. You don't lose yourself for Don.
Right.
And Don, I just made that up. That wasn't the person's name. So I appreciate, I realize we can talk about this forever. I appreciate your thoughts on this. And we'll, hopefully we're back next week, God willing, with another video, but I am going to upload this one. So once we all say goodbye and bye from Cleveland, thank you, Andrew. For anybody who's watching this, please leave comments, thoughts, experiences in the post. And we pray for all of you. Anything you want to add as we wrap this up?
Ditto. We pray for everyone. Love everybody.
Bless you. Love everybody. That's the easy answer. All right. So bless you. Kisses. God's love. Oh, you've been blessed, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.